The U.S. economy added more than expected jobs in April, but falling participation rates raise concern. FDA restricts Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine over risk of blood clotting. California vows to become sanctuary state for abortion and could see 3,000% increase of abortion from out of state. Elon Musk calls for investigation into groups pressuring advertisers and who are behind those groups. Xi Jinping announced to go all the way with zero COVID policy, and what could this lead CCP to? Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Wei and Kathy Show. I'm your host, Kathy Zhang. Wei is still not back yet, so but today we'll have quite a few news to share with you and some analysis along with that. Again, with the aftermath of this leaked Supreme Court draft ruling leaked to the media, all the red states, the blue states, all reacting to the purported overturn of the Roe v. Wade case, and California, what's happening with California, and you probably could expect, but what's the detail behind it? So we'll share with you about that, and also what are the red states are doing. But first of all, let's take a look at some of the news today. The U.S. economy added higher than expected jobs in April, which is good news. It added 428,000 jobs, which is higher than the expected 400,000 jobs. The unemployment rate was at 3.6%. Just a little bit higher than expected, which was 3.5%. According to the Department of Labor, however, the labor force participation rate declined to 62.2% from 62.4%, and which is the lowest since this year. The largest job growth in April came from the leisure and the hospitality sector, which added 78,000. Retail trade also showed some growth, adding 29,000 jobs, primarily in food and beverage store sectors. That shows a little bit, relief to those retail sectors, and some other jobs added in like manufacturing and other area. The average wage for all employees on private non-farm payrolls rose by 0.3% in April, which is lower than 0.4% in March, down to the lowest point for this year. So that kind of casted some shadow. The United States economy rebounded from the pandemic much faster than expected, and also it's faster than economies around the world. The demand from the United States, consumers continues to grow and strong. The spending remains solid, especially in the services such as concerts and travel. Employers are trying to hire workers to meet the needs and posted 11.5 million jobs openings earlier this spring, which is the highest since 2000. Along with the job growth, the economy experienced its worst growth quarter since the start of the COVID pandemic, with worker output falling 7.5% in the first 3 months, the largest slowdown since 1947, and the second worst quarter on the record. The gross domestic product fell 1.4% between January and March. In the meantime, the 40-year record high inflation is holding back the growth. The Federal Reserve announced on May 4th that it will raise its benchmark interest rate by 0.5 percentage point. Companies are still facing the gap of more than 5.5 million jobs between the open positions and the available workers. The chief U.S. economist at Oxford Economics, her name is Kathy Bojasis, told the Wall Street Journal that from the Fed's perspective, their biggest concern is our wage price spiral. What does that mean? She's referring to a situation where wage increases exacerbate the inflation, which in turn further drives wage increase as employers try to pass on higher cost to consumers. So she believes the way out is to get more people into the labor market. So that's why the declining of labor force participation rate in April is not a positive sign. On the other hand, the supply side of the economy could not keep up with the spending, especially with many exporting countries also struggling with the pandemic. China's ports have suffered a series of closure under the so-called zero COVID policy. That will have we will have a more detailed report on the most updated development in China on this. So the next piece of news, it's about the Food and Drug Administration announced yesterday on the May 5th that it will restrict the use of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine to adults who cannot receive the mRNA vaccines. FDA said it is because of the risk of potentially life-threatening side effects with the Johnson & Johnson shot. In the statement, FDA officials said that they re-evaluated the data and found that the risk of TTS may occur within 2 weeks of the vaccination. This TTS refers to a rare form of blood clotting, which is life-threatening. FDA said that Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine can now only be administered to people aged 18 and older who cannot receive either the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine. We know there are these two vaccines are two-dose vaccines and use an RNA technology, but the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a single shot and use adenovirus technology. So what does FDA means by those cannot receive the mRNA vaccine? The agency gave some examples of people who may be allergic to the mRNA vaccine or have concerns about receiving mRNA and would not otherwise get a COVID vaccine. But it did not spell very clearly how the new guidelines will be enforced. Johnson & Johnson on Thursday issued a statement following the FDA's announcement saying that, quote, data continues to support a favorable benefit-risk profile for the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine in adults when compared with no vaccine, end quote. So in regards to the COVID-19 vaccine, I had a series of an interview with Dr. Paul Alexander. He specifically talked about the vaccine, what it could bring, but this interview was only posted on our channel on Safe Chat. So if you are interested, you can go back to watch it if you have not done so. All right, so now let's talk about what's happening after the leak of the Supreme Court draft ruling suggesting the justices would overturn Roe v. Wade case, and what's happening in the different states around the country. So this leaked draft ruling shows that the Roe v. Wade could be overturned, and it would shift the power to the states on abortion policies. So red states and blue states around the country are reacting swiftly and differently for sure to such news. Some states are moving to limit and even impose penalty on abortion, and some states, for example, California, is moving to make itself a sanctuary city for abortion. So before we go to California, where Kathy, we are living here right now, let's take a look at what other red states are doing. At least 26 states in the country would ban abortion almost immediately if the Supreme Court ruling becomes final. That's according to the Guttmacher Institute, which is a pro-abortion research group. In its study, 13 states are poised to enact immediate abortion bans, and another 13 states could quickly follow suit if the Supreme Court overturns Roe. Those states are Arkansas, Idaho, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming, which just passed its triggering law last month. So what it means is that once the Supreme Court overturns the Roe v. Wade case, the state will trigger its ban on abortion. And then there are also 5 additional states with an abortion ban still on the book from before Roe v. Wade. They could be reinstated if the law is overturned, according to Guttmacher's research. So what are the 5 states? They are Alabama, Arizona, Michigan, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. So totally, the overturning of Roe v. Wade could trigger at least 18 states to ban abortions almost immediately. Guttmacher reports that 4 more states, including Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, and South Carolina, all have laws banning abortion after the 6 weeks mark, which have been ruled unconstitutional but would likely to be revisited if Roe is overturned. And according to this analysis, 4 additional states, they are Florida, Indiana, Montana, and Nebraska, are likely to ban or severely restrict abortions if Roe v. Wade is overturned. So, and besides that, some states are also preparing to revive old laws that impose significant penalties on abortion. For example, in Louisiana, the Republican House of Representatives just advanced a bill classifying abortion as homicide from the moment of fertilization and allowing prosecutors to charge both patients and the providers with murder. And in Arkansas, the state's triggering ban will make abortion a felony, except to save the life of the mother. And the premise is the Supreme Court, in fact, overturns Roe v. Wade. So I just wonder, in our audience right now, are you in those states, 26 states? If you are, would you please just let me know, which state you are in right now, and so that we can have some idea of who you are, on this issue. All right, so let's take a look at the blue state, which is led by California. California Governor Gavin Newsom and the leaders of the California legislatures, who are all Democrats, vowed to make the state of California the sanctuary state for abortion. California could see up to 3,000 increase in the number of people coming for the procedure if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. That's again according to the Guttmacher Institute's study. So, what are the details? Immediately following the Supreme Court leak suggesting that the justices would overturn Roe v. Wade, Governor Gavin Newsom and other California Democratic leaders accelerated their plan to make California a sanctuary state for women seeking abortion. On Monday night, that's when the news came out about the leaked document. California Democratic leaders immediately unveiled a plan for a state constitutional amendment on the November ballot, asking voters to ensure continued access to abortion services. So they wanted to amend the California Constitution. So that has to be a voter-approved amendment. But actually, back in 1972, there has been already a voter-approved amendment in California's Constitution to protect the right to privacy, which applies to abortion. So in California, abortion is already protected, but the Democratic leaders in California wants to make another step forward. The Democrats control the California state legislatures, in fact, have already written 13 bills related to abortion services. The bills range from authorizing more medical providers to perform abortions, to creating scholarship for reproductive care doctors, and blocking other states from accessing some California medical records so that they won't be able to find out who they performed the abortion procedure to, the out-of-state patients. And also there are bills to create a fund for taxpayer money to help pay for women in state where abortion is illegal to come to California to get the procedure. And that money will cover basically all the expenses for those women coming from other states, including their, the living cost, the transportation, and the child care if they have other children, and even for the missing wage because they come to California for the procedure. And yesterday, on May 5th, Democrats in the state legislature fast-tracked a bill that would block other states' laws from imposing civil or criminal penalties on people who provide aid abortions in California. As a matter of fact, the California Democrats has been preparing for this a long time ago, before Politico leaked the draft ruling, and have taken a number of steps to ensure it's a sanctuary state for abortion services. For example, in May 2019, Governor Newsom signed a proclamation on reproductive freedom to welcome people seeking abortion to California. And in September 2021, Newsom signed a slate of legislations to heighten privacy around abortions and declared California as a reproductive freedom state. One of the bills requires information on the abortion procedure to be sent to the patient exclusively rather than to additional members on a health plan, such as guardians of minors. Another bill penalizes individuals who post personal information about other people who work for or go to reproductive health centers. Again, in March 2022, this year, Newsom signed a bill to make abortion cheaper by limiting the health insurance, by banning the health insurers from imposing copay, deductibles, or other cost-sharing requirements for abortions and abortion-related services. California, in fact, has already been one of the 6 states that requires health insurance plan to cover abortion services. In the meanwhile, the California Legislative Women's Caucus has asked Newsom for $20 million to help pay for women from other states where abortion would be outlawed to come to California for the procedure and to pay for the services that I just talked about, right? All the cost related to those women who come for the procedure. And it's expected that Governor Newsom could announce it in his revised budget proposal next week. According to God Measures Institute's study, it says that California could see up to a 3,000% increase in the number of people coming from out of the state for abortion if the Supreme Court allows states to totally ban abortion. This study shows most of those people would be driving from Arizona, but also people could just fly from out of state if they are far away. In fact, there has already been people arriving from out of the state for abortion care in California. For example, in Santa Clara County, where the Silicon Valley is, the county supervisor, Cindy Chavez, who is now also running for the mayor of city of San Jose, requested a $3 million injection from the county's board for Planned Parenthood, Mar Monte, which is a local Planned Parenthood organization, to bolster its services. Its health centers have seen 80 people from out of the state since June 2021, and that's according to a release on April 29th, just a week ago. But it also anticipated a greater influx. So that's what California is up to. And I know we have California, audience from California. So what do you think of this? Have you heard about it? What do you think of this? Leave your comments here. So let's see. Before I go on, let's take a look at some of your comments. And Cope said, no wonder why Democrats keep the border wide open for illegal immigrants. Okay. Okay, so River Beach Farm said it's not in our constitution to allow the killing of unborn children. Louis, you are right. Okay. Yeah, so continue, please continue to leave your comments here. And let's just discuss this issue. All right, so let's continue with just follow up on what's happening with a Twitter deal. Since Elon Musk, sealed this deal with Twitter to take over the company for $44 million. Of course, it's still in the process. And Elon Musk recently called for an investigation against groups that are pressuring the advertisers to boycott Twitter. And Musk has been a vocal critic of Twitter's content censorship measure, and it's expected that he will change those policies when he takes over. So what happened was following Elon Musk's acquisition, 26 groups reportedly sent letters to companies and corporations such as Coca-Cola, Kraft Foods, and Disney, calling to boycott Twitter if Musk makes changes to the company. The organizations include left-wing groups like Black Lives Matter, Gender Equity Policy Institute, and the pro-abortion groups such as NARAL, Pro-Choice America, Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choices, and some feminist group like Women's Rights, among others. The organizations claim that Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, this is a quote, will fully toxify our information ecosystem and be a direct threat to public safety, end quote. And they also wrote, that's a quote again, as top advisors on Twitter, your brand risks association with a platform amplifying hate, extremist, health misinformation, and conspiracy theories. The letter called on to those companies to request Twitter, quote, continues to uphold the practice that serve as guideposts for other big tech platforms, or otherwise to threat Musk's Twitter that they will pull advertising spending from Twitter if they are not. So that's basically what those 26 groups want the big companies who are the advertiser of Twitter do. So what's Elon Musk's response? He called for an investigation into those organizations. On May 3rd, he tweeted, "Who is funding those organizations that want to control your access to information? Let's investigate." And he continued, "Sunlight is the best disinfectant." On May 4th, Musk tweeted again, and that he included a Daily Mail's report saying that, "I wonder if those fundings, these organizations are fully aware of what the organizations are doing." So this letter signed by the 26 groups was sent on a headed paper bearing the logos of 3 organizations called Accountable Tech, Media Matters for America, and Ultraviolent. So in the Daily Mail's article, it had in-depth reporting on those 3 groups on the headers of the letter, and also many of the other 26 groups who signed the letter. The article revealed who are funding these groups. That includes George Soros' Open Society Foundation and some nonprofit organizations by former President Clinton and Obama administration staffers, and also some wealthy Democrats donors and their family foundations, as well as labor union and the government of European nations. And of course, some of the group's funding sources are not disclosed. So yeah, if you're interested, you can go to read the Daily Mail article. So, all right. Louis said that now California wants to be a destination place for abortion. This is sad. And Kitty Hawk saying, sounds like he may be planning legal actions. That's referring to Elon Musk, right? And Dee Dee said, Elon, please buy up all social media and the television stations. Okay. All right. So now let's go to the updates from China in regards to the COVID policy. The Chinese Communist government has just announced that it is determined to carry out the zero COVID until its victory. Even though we have shown you so many tragedies is happening in China, especially in Shanghai and other cities. And people may wonder, any people with a common sense probably would rethink if such kind of a zero COVID policy and lockdown, should be still continued. However, according to the state-run media CCTV, the General Secretary Xi Jinping spoke to the Politburo Standing Committee on May 5th, and he made a very forceful statement saying that maintain zero COVID policy and never waver. So that's the original words. Let's take a look. Xi Jinping said, unswervingly adhere to the general policy of dynamic zero COVID and resolutely fight against all distortions, doubts, and denials of our epidemic prevention policy. So that's the very central meaning of his speech. CCTV actually reported on this with over a 5-minute reporting, but actually it was just read out. The whole thing, the whole 5 minutes was read out by the CCTV anchor without any original words from Xi Jinping. And you would find, to any Western audience, you will find it's very weird, right? There's no original words, but that was kind of typical in the CCTV's reporting. So for people who are familiar with the Chinese Communist government, what Xi Jinping said is very similar to Chairman Mao's famous slogan of carrying the revolution all the way to the end. But this time, Xi Jinping might carry the Chinese Communist Party to an end. And that's how, kind of our editorial analysis. And we'll show you why. So when did Mao had this famous slogan, carry the revolution to the end? That's right before the Yangtze River crossing battle in 1949. Mao was advised to stop at the Yangtze River and rule half of the country over there, and leaving the other side of the country to Kuomintang, which is the Chinese Nationalist Party. But Mao rejected the idea and published an eloquent article titling Carry the Revolution to the End. So at the time, he led the Chinese Communist Party army, crossed the Yangtze River, and then ended the life of the Chinese Nationalist Party in mainland China. But Xi Jinping's speech is another very resounding carry the revolution to the end. Only this time it could end its own life. So why that's such a big possibility? We have to look at the geopolitical landscape for CCP right now, both external and internal. So externally, it has been setting up enemies from all sides. For example, with the European Union and the Chinese Communist government in 2013 began to talk about the China-EU Investment Agreement, which is called the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. Because since China was allowed into WTO in 2001, the European Union has kept its WTO commitments and opened its market to China. However, the Chinese Communist government has used all kinds of excuses not to open reciprocally. So any EU company has joint ventures in China has to share and transfer the technology, which is similar to any US companies investing in China. So the negotiation between China and the EU took 7 years and a total of 35 rounds of negotiation. Finally, it was concluded on December 30th, 2020. So what is the content of this China-EU investment agreement? Basically, it's a one-sided agreement that China would open up to the EU in the following areas, including telecom, cloud service, computer services, automotive industry, healthcare, manufacturing, maritime transportation, aircrafts, commerce, finance, construction services, etc. It's very wide. And China would gradually lift foreign investment restrictions and allowed establishment of EU wholly owned companies in China. So that's according to that investment agreement. So here, we have to just insert a comment. When you see an agreement signed with the Chinese Communist government with the word gradual in it, then it most likely will be the same as just nothing. Because the CCP will drag on with this gradual thing until it finishes taking all the advantages of the other party. The Chinese Communist Party's commitment to join WTO is gradual, remember? And it says with Hong Kong, it will have Hong Kong to have 50-year self-governance, right? But, all of a sudden, without half of the 50-year pass by, it just all of a sudden threw out the whole thing. And the Chinese Communist Party promised Obama administration to open up the books of the U.S. stock exchange listed companies was gradual. So it never really happened until President Trump just, enforced at the end of 2020. The China-European investment agreement was negotiated for 7 years. Think about it, which is supposed to be so when China was allowed to the WTO. And within the 7 years of the negotiation, the CCP fully took advantage of that time period. So anyway, after 7 years and the 35 rounds of the negotiation, the result, anyway, they got a result, which is good, right? However, 5 months later, in May 2021, the European Parliament voted overwhelmingly to freeze this investment agreement because the EU's sanctions against the Chinese Communist government's human rights abuse in Uyghur. So the CCP counter-sanctioned EU officials and the scholars, which made the European Union so angry and cut off the investment agreement altogether. So you probably could imagine how angry the Europeans were when they got the unilateral benefit of the investment agreement after 7 years of the suffering, but had to cut it off. Then 7 months later, in December 2021, the European Union released the Global Gateway Infrastructure Plan. What is that? That's an invasion of, that's really like the responding of the Europe against China's One Belt, One Road policy, and the Chinese Communist Party started to fight against each other in various places. After that, relationship between the two sides, between China and the EU, went all the way down, in all aspects. The Chinese Communist government's support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine has actually brought EU and the China relationship to the edge. But the funny thing is, the feeling of the Europeans are almost invisible to the Chinese Communist Party leaders. So the EU was totally disappointed by the negotiations at the April 1st China-EU summit. The polite EU officials, the foreign ministers, just described that meeting as a chicken and a duck conversation or just talking with a deaf person. At the end of April, the German Chancellor Strauss chose Japan as his first stop on the first trip to Asia. That broke the custom that the former Chancellor Angela Merkel, who had established that making China always the first stop on every visit to Asia. And some German media even called this new chancellor's Asian trip actually an anti-China trip. So the era of a large-scale investment in China by the EU is over, and it is impossible to reverse. Because there are other factors like rising transportation costs and the rising labor costs in China, the deterioration of the business environment in China, and a completely unbearable way of preventing the COVID-19 policy, the zero COVID policy in Shanghai and coming to other cities as well. So, and the other considerations are the threat and the risk to the supply chain due to such zero COVID policy. So Europe is now significantly increased its military budget, and so they are also talking about in Germany to review Merkel's pro-Russian and pro-China policy. So Europe now sees the Chinese Communist government as a threat, that's for sure, not an ally. And the Chinese Communist Party has hardened its policy with the EU, which has, not been so for a long time. So after the European Union decided not to continue the same policy with the Chinese Communist government anymore, who will fill up the vacuum? So the EU Executive Committee President von der Leyen recently visited India and issued a joint statement on April 25th. They announced the establishment of a special committee on trade and technology to promote cooperation between Europe and India. And historically, the United States was previously the only country to sign a similar Indo-European technology agreement with the EU, and India's second, and India is to strengthen their strategic partnership, calling it a strategic coordination mechanism. So that's can see how India can especially take the advantage from such a change. Now let's take a look at the United States. Secretary of State Blinken was scheduled to give an important foreign policy speech yesterday, but it was said that he had to postpone it because he contracted COVID. But the Wall Street Journal said on the same day it obtained the contents of the speech, showing that a Biden administration is ready to reaffirm to the outside world that the Chinese Communist government is the biggest geopolitical rival of the United States, not Russia. The political environment just turns out to be that the Chinese Communist Party just has been kept handing the ammunitions to the United States to fight itself. That includes the South China Sea issue, the Hong Kong issue, Taiwan Strait, the Uyghur Xinjiang issue, the pandemic, and the wolf warrior diplomacy by the Chinese officials, and also recently the Russia-Ukraine war, how the CCP stands on that. So not only the political figures, many career bureaucrats in the United States administrative units, especially the military personnel in the Pentagon, have shifted their thinking to the direction that Blinken was going to deliver. But some of them have actually realized that earlier than Blinken, of course. So that means that the Biden's administration and the current State Department's policy toward China is to work with allies to confront and compete with China and to build guardrail to prevent competition from turning into outright hostility. So from our standpoint, it's actually not strong enough, but it's certainly, it's for sure that the U.S.-China relationship will not get better and it won't go back to what's implemented for the past 40 decades, which is called the engagement policy. Because the United States government no longer believes that a policy of engagement is the way to work with the communist China. Remember last time we shared my interview with General David Stilwell. He believes that actually from the Trump administration, they figured out that they have the United States should use transactional diplomacy instead of the traditional diplomacy. So it looks like the Biden administration is a little too slow, but in any ways, it's coming around, looks like. So that's about the external environment that the communist China is now facing. So now, what's the internal situation? First, we have to also take a look at the history from the past, decade or so. In 2008 financial crisis, the United States collapsed by, almost half, but the Chinese Communist government came through relatively unscratched. And then in 2010, China's GDP surpassed Japan. And then, the Chinese government just figured maybe it will, surpass the United States pretty soon. Therefore, Xi Jinping just, he had this saying, East is up and the West is down. East means China and the West means the United States. And then many of the courses have been changed since then. In response to the Trump administration's change in the U.S.-China trade imbalance, Xi Jinping's reply was to carry forward the spirit of struggle and strengthen the skills of struggle, which is very typical for the Chinese Communist Party. And he tried to counter the U.S. policy and actions against Communist China with increasing assertiveness, with people called wolf warrior diplomacy, with very hard-handed and with strong words when they doing the diplomacy against the United States, and that became the new diplomatic norm for the Chinese Communist Party. So that means the Chinese government failed to recognize a clear interpretation of the situation in China. What's the change in the EU and the surrounding countries in the Southeast Asia and the United States. CCP failed to recognize how they have such things already changed, and so with the previous policy of reform and the opening up, the China's door open with a lot of foreigners and enterprises coming in, and brought in the technology, and plus more importantly is the steal of the intellectual property from United States and other countries by the CCP using its so-called policy of that not allowing the wholly owned foreign investment companies in the United States, and also, of course, in other espionage incidents actions that it implemented. So now then in the CCP just, but whatever it is doing in the past several decades, actually the Communist China has been doing just one word, actually, that's copying. So they copy everything, using all different kinds of scheme and ways, and they all of a sudden they found, maybe we are in the front row of the world. We are the most advanced in technology already. However, it's not continuing anymore, including the EU, including the United States. They all found that it cannot continue that way anymore. So all of a sudden, there's no one to copy. So even though the Chinese Communist government thought it's already on the front row, but since there's no one to copy anymore, or people are starting to guard against the CCP, then it really into trouble. However, somehow General Secretary Xi Jinping is not really reading this correctly, and in face of this pandemic, it just used this so-called dynamic zero COVID policy, and it created so much trouble and so much tragedies in Shanghai, in other cities, like the widespread hunger and the conflict between the police and common citizens. And there are mournings everywhere. There are angers, more and more angers from the society. However, Xi Jinping just continued, and so that's what happened on May 5th. He spoke at the Standing Committee of the Politburo of the CCP and made an important speech in regards to the policy against, relates to the pandemic prevention. So what he said was, our practice has proven that our prevention and the control policy is determined by the nature and the purpose of the party. So that really tells everything. The policy for the Chinese Communist government to respond to the COVID pandemic, they don't really see it as a public health issue. They really see it as a political issue. And they deemed that the policy is determined by the CCP's nature and the purpose. And he continues to saying that our prevention and the control policy has stood the test of the history, and our prevention and the control measures are scientific and effective. So even though, with all the facts, or with all the videos, going viral online, he insisted that its policy is effective and scientific. Then he said that we won the defense of Wuhan, which it enacted the severe lockdown in the beginning of the pandemic. And he said we will also be able to win the defense of the greater Shanghai. He continued saying that we must have a profound, complete, and comprehensive understanding of the pandemic prevention and control policy determined by the party's central committee. So it calls for to just adhere to the policy that the party has committed. And he said that we will not waver in adhering to the general policy of the dynamic zero COVID, and will resolutely fight against all distortions, doubts, and denials of our pandemic prevention policy. And he called on party committees, governments at all levels, as well as all sectors of the society, should unify their thoughts and actions to the party central committee's decision and development and the deployment, and consciously maintain a high degree of consistency with the party central committee in ideology, policies, and actions. And he also declared that persistence is victory. So that's Xi Jinping's version of bringing the revolution to the end. And so that's actually means that he will do whatever it takes by whatever means to prove that the zero policy is exactly the right thing to do. So here's the problem. Zero policy is totally wrong, and it's a pervasive, but there's no such thing as you'll be able to kill the virus, but by just hiding people in the rooms and by just just like remember my interview with Dr. Robert Malone, and he said that it's the virus is just like the rain from the sky, and how you can just hide people from it, right? But now Xi Jinping is saying that he's going to cover the sky with his hands, right? So it's, for people who understand the history of the Chinese Communist Party, it's just like back in the 1950s, the CCP was touting to have 10,000 pounds of grain per acre is, their requirement, which turned out to be, it's such an absurdity. So, and this is same thing again, the history just repeats itself, and now that's the same absurdity happens in the year of 2022 in China. So Xi Jinping is going to continue to push forward with this zero COVID policy, which is destined to make people more angry, and there will create more, conflicts between the civilians and the government, and will create more instability inside China. And the CCP actually, they know their power grab is really depends on the stability of the society of China, which people just don't know why Xi Jinping cannot get it. And also it has and will continue to create more conflict externally as well because of all these kind of problem, including like the global supply chain. So there's a saying in China, in the Chinese culture, saying that if the gods wants to destroy something, it will first make this thing become crazy. So yeah, so it maybe the God just want to destroy the Communist Party in China. It's doomed to fail, it's doomed to collapse, and maybe that's what's going on in China right now. So maybe Xi Jinping doesn't even realize what he's doing, but sometimes the force by the God, it's just cannot be avoided, and perhaps that's the destination of the CCP. So, yeah, what do you think? We know, there's a lot of history behind the CCP that we can learn about, but yeah, and so that's how we analyze the current situation in China. Let's see. Oh wow, the time just flies, and so I see a lot of discussion here, and I don't know if we can go through all of these, but let's see. Patrick saying that what really bothers me is Saki's White House refusal to discourage protesters go to the justice's home. Very, very bad. Yeah, so you were talking about the protesters outside of the justice's home. Yeah, that's just, again, we saw how the left-wing activists try to pressure those justices in previously, right? In the two justices appointment, the nominee hearing, and so we just don't know. We hope the justices would have a strong spine, right? So Louis said that we must defund all government funding of Planned Parenthood. It's just the right thing to do. And we know that President Trump tried to do that, right? But things changed in this administration. Kitty Hawk saying, praying for Shanghai. Thank you. I think we all, wanted to do that. And Louis said, I found the states posted on Safe Chat. Thank you. And let's see. Hollis said, Louis, Kathy told the groups in the Daily Mail article, watch the replay later. Okay, yeah, so yeah, I can, if you are referring to the Daily Mail article and if you want the link, I will post it afterwards. And Kitty Hawk said, when they rose up, the CCP ran them over with tanks. They denied it. That's true, and that's what happened on the Tiananmen Square back in 1989. But just recently we saw more and more uprising by the Chinese people, including people in Shanghai, in different ways. And so I think it does create difficulty when a tyranny, a dictatorship, uses such a force to try to crush people. But they would not always win, actually, if the Chinese people really rise up. So yeah, let's pray for the Chinese people, right? All right, let me see this on the Safe Chat. I don't really have it open right now, so and oh yeah, one thing I just noticed that on Safe Chat we again I have been increasing the subscribers. So thank you for all. Thank you all for doing that. And so Alan said, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, my pleasure. And Yankee said, time for crazy. Okay. And Yankee said, the Sound of Hope is real news. Thank you. And we do our best, try to bring the facts and the truthful information to you, so that and a lot of times you mentioned what we shared is not, you cannot find it in the mainstream media and some other media. So yeah, that's we feel blessed that we have you as audience that appreciates what we provide with you. So, all right, so I think it's a really long show, out of my expectation, but it's great to have you with me to share this information and have a discussion. So that's all for today, and have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. All right, good night, bye-bye.